Salutations. My name is Kevin Garcia, and I'm a professional comic book historian. I have actually been paid to read comic books. I actually have contributed to the official handbook of the Marvel Universe and everything. I am also a professional educator. I teach writing and graphic design at the Liberal Arts and Science Academy. And with that out of the way, let's talk about superhero movies. There are a lot of those. In fact, there are a lot of those, and they have a lot of really great, really memorable heroes, but some of the villains, not so much. So let's talk about what goes into making a really, really good villain, why some villains don't work, and what you guys can do, because I know all of you here are creating your own superheroes at home. First, let's talk about what didn't work. All right, so when they are translating these stories from the comic books to the movies, they're going to change them, and they get changed a lot. Iron Man became more snarky, Thor became less powerful, Captain America became more powerful. With the Guardians of the Galaxy, they added this whole family dynamic, and all these changes worked really well to make the characters more interesting or just more memorable or just make better movies. But the villains got left by the wayside. Thor's bad guy, Malekith, in the comics is one of his most pernicious foes. He is crazy powerful, but he's much more feared for his sly manipulation. Basically, he's Loki dialed to 11. But in the movie, they hired one of the doctors and then put him under so much makeup and voice modulation no one could recognize him, much less care. Ant-Man's villain, Yellowjacket, was also kind of a misstep. In the comics, Ant-Man is Yellowjacket, and that's the fear. Not fighting a bad guy who is similar to you, but becoming the bad guy, or in this case, becoming the kind of hero you don't want to be. Doctor Strange's bad guy. Okay, look, I am a self-proclaimed comic book expert. I had to look this guy up. Kaecilius was not memorable in the comics, and he wasn't any more memorable in the movies. So what villains did work? The ones we could feel for. We hated Kilgrave, but we could feel sorry for little Kevin when he was tortured by his parents. We feared Wilson Fisk, but he earnestly wanted to help his city. Killmonger, he was a horrible king. But he wasn't wrong. Loki and Magneto have become so sympathetic that both in the movies and the comics, they're kind of the good guys. I mean, in their own way. They had really rough childhoods, and they want to make the world a better place. They just want to do it their way. Then, of course, there are those outliers. Yeah, those villains we should not care about but want to see so much. Joker and the Red Skull. They need no backstory. They need no explanation. They just exist to cause disorder in the world. But I would caution you, if you're creating your own villains, against creating one that is just pure evil and completely unsympathetic. No, the audience doesn't need to actually agree with the villain, but it's very hard to do true evil just right. All right, so let's talk about design. In the movies, the most common villain type you will see is the evil twin. The superficial, dark reflection of the hero. The character who's basically the hero in all respects, except he's evil. The thing is, evil twins are actually very, very rare in the comic books themselves. They do exist, but they're few and far between, and usually when they show up, it's just to illustrate for the hero how easy it is for things to go wrong, how tempting it is to fall to the dark side. Think of Zod, who wants to save Krypton at the expense of Earth. Or Obadiah Stane, who wants to be the successful businessman Tony Stark's father is, and the inventor Tony Stark is. I'm going to toss Ward in here, because I want to throw Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. some love. He, as a hero, was a really bland and uninteresting character. But as a villain, he was the character fans loved to hate. He was every much as skilled as the best S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. But he would turn everything they knew and loved on its head just to take over and make what he felt was a better world. Better than an evil twin, though, is the true dark reflection, the opposite number, the opposing force of evil to the hero's good. Thor is a warrior born. Loki is a talker more than a fighter. Professor X wants peace and equality. Magneto knows that will never happen. Batman represents the order that could exist in the world. Joker is chaos personified. Probably the best known opposite number is Lex Luthor, and in the most recent movie, let's not talk about that. In the comic books, Lex is diametrically opposed to Superman. Everything Superman is, Lex isn't. Superman is an alien born with great power. Lex is a self-made human being. Superman wants to welcome visitors from foreign lands. Lex wants to get rid of all alien influences. Superman wants to help all others. Lex wants to help himself, and so on. If you're creating a hero, think about what defines that hero. Now, what would their opposite be? And with that, I want to touch base on the greatest challenge a hero can face. And if you take nothing else away from this talk, I want you to take this phrase: the Tyrant Holdfast. Joseph Campbell, folklorist, is rightly lauded for popularizing the monomyth, the idea that there's this great hero's journey that happens in all these great epics. Well, Joseph Campbell also coined a name for the hero's great villain. He is Ra's al Ghul, wanting to destroy humanity to save the world. He is Magneto, resisting peace. He is Darth Vader, clinging on to his childhood pain. The Tyrant Holdfast represents the past and resents the progress represented by the hero. He is defined by his megalomaniacal greed and his desire to control all else. The common people fear him. The hero fears him. The hero must go through some kind of great training or preparation just to challenge this great villain. And that's the thing. This Holdfast, his name comes from his obsession with stopping that progress. He holds fast to the ways of stagnation. He wants to prevent people from prospering or from enjoying any success they've had. But the Holdfast also sows the seeds for his own downfall. He, unconsciously possibly, provides the means for the hero to overcome him and bring hope back to society. All right, so we've got our villain. Now we need villain support. The giant CGI fight that ends every superhero movie needs to die. But I understand why it exists. If you have one hero versus one villain or even a pair of villains, everybody's got their moment to shine. But if you have an ensemble cast, then you need to give every hero their hero moment, and that means you need more faces to punch. Sometimes this works, as with Captain America's Howling Commandos fighting Skull's Hydra forces. Sometimes it doesn't, with the personality-less parademons fighting the Justice League. But what's the alternative? Ideally, the villain has support. Henchmen, a team of underlings. You know, in all the superhero movies that have come out this century, there really haven't been a lot that have had a competent villain team. And I don't mean Magneto's followers here. I mean a team where each of the villains is a match for each of the heroes. A team of equally threatening bad guys. They exist in the comics. In the Avengers comics, some of their worst foes are the Masters of Evil. Now, yes, the name is hokey, but in one of their most well-known stories, the Masters laid siege to the Avengers mansion. They beat up the original Jarvis. They destroyed the Avengers' home. They even tore up the only pictures Cap had of his parents. Bad guys. Over at DC, some of the worst bad guys come from Earth 3. In a multiverse of infinite possibilities, the worst threat can be you. On Earth 3, all alignments are flipped. Joker and Lex are struggling heroes, while the world is ruled by evil Wonder Woman, evil Superman, and evil Batman. Now imagine a movie in which the Justice League fought the crime syndicate. That'd be pretty cool. All right. The key, though, is that the villains need to be more powerful than the hero. The reason I didn't really count Magneto's Brotherhood as a competent team is because, in reality, Magneto is by himself a threat to the X-Men. Just as Ultron was to the Avengers, Ego was to the Guardians of the Galaxy. If the hero has to struggle to overcome the bad guy, the audience has even more of a reason to sympathize with him. But that is a very delicate balance to make. It's easy to screw it up. Suicide Squad were introduced as villains who would have to fight threats that real heroes couldn't be witness fighting. But then they ended up fighting Enchantress and Incubus in what has to be the most generic glowing light from the sky while faceless hordes attack the city that the producers could think of. And they were all street-level villains. They should have been fighting a street-level threat. Instead, they were fighting an extinction-level event, and that difference was just too broad. They had the opposite problem for the Justice League. In the comics, Steppenwolf is basically a space god of war, but he always plays second fiddle to the more menacing and scary Darkseid. In the movie, his only job was to find his cues and say generic villain lines until Superman showed up. Then the Man of Steel slapped him sideways and the fight was over. Yes, Superman is the most powerful hero, but if the fight isn't a challenge, what's the point? All right, let's think about theme for a second. Imagine you're creating a hero. If you could sum up your hero in a few words, what would they be? Now, do your villains fit into that same category? They don't have to. This doesn't have to be a across-the-board rule, but it's a good rule of thumb. Think about Spider-Man's bad guys. Think about the Lizard, Vulture, Dr. Octopus. What are they? Animals. What's Spider-Man? Think about Batman's villains. Most of them end up in Arkham Asylum. They're insane. What would you have to be to put on a bat costume every night? And let's think about color. No, not every villain should dress the same. But when you have heroes like Superman, Captain America, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, all having the same basic colors, what colors should the villains have? Think about Green Goblin, Lex Luthor, Loki, the Joker. What colors are most dominant? Now think about the Hulk. You are meant to fear him when you first see him. He is meant to seem like a bad guy, and he has villain colors. All right, so what happens if your villain becomes too popular? Make him a good guy, right? I mean, worked for Harley Quinn and Deadpool. However, I would caution against the temptation to turn every bad guy good, all right? It works in a one-off story or for villains that have only been around for a short while, but in the never-ending battle that is most American comics, it's not going to last very long. Spider-Man's bad guy, Sandman, joined the Avengers once. The Professor X's evil brother, Juggernaut, joined the X-Men. And more than once, the Justice League were joined by Slade. Sorry, Deathstroke. And the thing is, these changes don't last. Some people are just better as bad guys. And plus, if you had to change your entire character's motivation to make them good, are they even the same character anymore? And with that, I want to address the murderous vigilante in the room. See, there seems to be a general misunderstanding of what an anti-hero is. An anti-hero is not simply a hero who is really tough and is willing to kill. No, an anti-hero by definition is a hero who lacks the qualities of a hero. All right? Heroes are thought to be good-looking and decent people. Venom and Deadpool are not those things. Heroes are meant to protect and serve. Punisher, Ghost Rider, they would rather just seek out the wicked. But here's the thing. Howard the Duck is also an anti-hero. He is a hero who does not want to do hero things. He's a hero who sucks at being a hero. He's still the protagonist, but he's an anti-hero. And that's the thing. Anti-heroes work best when they can serve as examples or point out the problems with being a hero. Punisher and Red Hood work best opposite Daredevil and Batman. They want to show how great it would be if we could kill the villains, while the true heroes have to maintain their moral code no matter what. When you want to turn an anti-hero into a straightforward hero, you have to nerf them. Punisher had a great Netflix series, but they did that by making sure he wasn't the take no prisoners, no exceptions character he's in the comics. They had to weaken his personal convictions just to make him a good protagonist. And it was a good show. With that, though, I want to talk about the one villain I haven't mentioned, and that is the greatest villain of all. You're lucky I can't snap my fingers. So, Thanos is a Tyrant Holdfast. He is a dark reflection of many of the heroes he faces. Yes, he has a faceless horde of outriders, but he also has a competent villain team in the Black Order. And, yeah, he's purple. But that is not why he's a great villain. And to tell you why he's a great villain, I'm going to do something I don't normally do and spoil the story. Specifically, 1990s Silver Surfer number 35. So this is the first meeting between Silver Surfer and Thanos. And just for some background, Silver Surfer is the most powerful active hero in the Marvel Universe. All right? He can trade blows with the Hulk. He can cast more energy than Thor. He can turn your gun into ice cream if he feels like. You know, he can literally do anything. And when he first met Thanos, he was utterly defeated. And Thanos didn't have to throw a single punch. No, Thanos completely defeated Silver Surfer using little more than his words. First, Thanos told Silver Surfer about the inequity of the universe. There are just too many people alive and too many technologies keeping them that way. And with all of the war and pollution and complacency out there, mankind and all the other races of the universe are just going to doom themselves to a lifetime of suffering. To illustrate his point, Thanos, after going all over time and space, brought Surfer to the planet of Solaria and showed him the innocent Solarians who had never known disease or war. He explained that because of this perfect condition, they were soon going to overpopulate their planet and lead themselves to a quick and horrible destruction. To prevent this, Thanos asked Surfer to help him kill half the population. Surfer rejected this. And then Thanos explained Surfer had already helped. See, while taking him to Earth, Silver Surfer got what anybody visiting Earth would have, and that's little tiny microbes on your skin. When he brought them to this untouched planet, Surfer introduced disease into an aseptic world. Leaving Silver Surfer then a few years in the future, and then leaving, Surfer got to see the fruits of his visit, millions of dead Solarians. Now, Surfer, being this all-powerful hero that he is, created a cure for all the living Solarians, but the damage had been done. Thanos had won. And that's what makes Thanos such a great villain. He not only has this sympathetic, maybe even a point that you can agree with, but he has the wherewithal to make his plans come true. He's not just trying to outpunch the villain, or hero rather, outpunch the hero, or cause a giant light from the sky to come down, or just randomly decide I'm going to take over or destroy. He has a point to make and the ability to make it. That's what makes him a good villain. And if you're wondering who I was, my name is Kevin Garcia. I have a very hard to remember website. I also have a blog that I never update because no one pays me. Thank you guys very much. Oh, okay. Yeah. This question was, there's a second Avengers movie coming out with Thanos in it. Are they going to mess it up? I know I've already talked to at least a couple people that haven't seen it yet and don't want it spoiled. But I will say this much. Even though they changed it a lot from the comics to the movies, they were pretty dang close to a lot of the stories in the comics in Infinity War, the movie. So I feel pretty confident that if you've read the rest of Infinity Gauntlet, you know where they're going to go with this, and I think they can do a good job with it. Now, that being said, there's at least one person who died who I want to make sure comes back because he's just too cool, but I'm sure he faked it. Anyway.
No spoilers.
Yeah, no spoilers. Oh. All right.
Do you have any recommendations for non-superhero villain stories?
Well, again, I was focusing right now on superhero comics, superhero stories rather, but there are, always really, really great elements of heroes. One of the things that I was kind of sad about looking through my list is that all of them were male. And as I was thinking about female villains, there actually are a lot in non-superhero movies. And although still superhero-y, one of the first ones that popped to my mind was Sailor Moon, because I was thinking of Queen Beryl for a bit. But the point is, there are plenty out there. The key is Joseph Campbell, for example, and a lot of people get Joseph Campbell wrong. They think of him as a guide of how to tell a story, and in reality, he's a guide of how to analyze a story. There's a big difference. And the guide he was giving, the description he was making, works on a lot of characters and a lot of stories. I threw in Darth Vader there briefly, and the idea is that he is entirely a Tyrant Holdfast. He is. They even tell him, you represent that old way. You're this archaic magic force. And he zealously guards it. What I think is neat about Kylo Ren, for example, jumping back and forth, is that he is like a Holdfast wannabe. He's really obsessed with the old ways and wants to go back to the way they were, but he never experienced them himself, so it's kind of weird, I know that didn't really answer your question, but there are definitely plenty of things, and what I would say is go to the descriptions that Joseph Campbell gives of the Holdfast, and you'll see there is there are a lot of characters that this could apply to, and in fact, it's kind of interesting to me when I Google Holdfast, one of the only things that pops up is my blog post describing the Holdfast. It is really weird to me that more people don't focus on this. I think most people, when they look at Joseph Campbell's book, they look at the chapter titles and they consider that they call it a day. Read the book.
Is there a reason why more kind of supernaturally based but still superhero comics aren't crossing over into movies as easily as conventional superhero comics?
So basically non-traditional comics, ones that aren't necessarily, the heroes in tights and capes and stuff. And the thing is, they have been making them into movies. It's just we don't notice as much. Back in the day, there was a movie Ghost World that came out. Road to Perdition was an award-winning movie. You mentioned Sandman. Preacher is currently a series right now on TV that is really, really well done. This is technically in a superhero universe, but just barely the TV show Legion, which is really, really, really weird and definitely pulls a lot from the comics. So I love that they are mining this and not just in the traditional ways, because I was talking to somebody earlier about older forms of like adapting a book into a movie. They would literally just take superficial elements and throw them out there, where as time went on, people are really saying, hey, we can actually take these stories and use them in new mediums, and it works really, really well. So I would say that these things do exist, so sometimes they have trouble getting out there. Like Why the Last Man, one of these really great non-traditional comics, they've been trying to make into a TV show for like 20 years, and they are finally, supposedly, got a pilot almost ready, so, they're working on it.
How can we use our knowledge of villains in comics to combat our real-life villains? Ooh.
So last time I was here talking about Loki, who was the god of lies, who wanted to build a wall but make the enemies pay for it. That is completely unrelated to any real life people. I don't know why some people thought I was making a comparison. But the thing is, with whether it's comic books or novels or the myth stories that Joseph Campbell was looking at, these were always meant to be, not always meant, but in the best cases, not meant to just be a simple, here's an adventure, but have a deeper meaning. For example, the Austin Library back there has a couple books that I've recommended. One of the ones I recommend is Black Panther by writer Christopher Priest. That is one of the books that I recommend that if you are not a superhero reader, but you want to give it a try, read that one. Because there is so much stuff in there, even though it's written in the 90s, and you're going to see stuff that, is applying in today's politics. There's a lot of stuff that happened in comic books in these superhero stories with villains. I'm trying not to get too political here, but sometimes people get elected. That people were like, this could never happen in real life. And then you're like, wait, again, I'm trying really hard to skirt that edge there and not be too political. But to answer your question, yes, you could totally do that. It's just that is the purpose of these stories. In the best case scenarios, they were written to have deeper meanings, not just be a surface level, can the heroes win? Silver Surfer is a good example. I mentioned how powerful he is. In the best Silver Surfer stories, it's not a matter of can he overcome the bad guy, because of course he can. The question is, should he? What are the ramifications of that? Are there reasons the bad guy should win? Are there ways that he can win that will allow other people to succeed? And those kinds of stories often have those deeper meanings that you could see in everyday politics, everyday life. So.
Is Rocket Raccoon an anti-hero?
Yes, but it's funny. I mentioned Deadpool earlier was very briefly a villain before they already started giving him his own books. And then he was, full-on anti-hero. Rocket Raccoon went the other direction. When Rocket Raccoon first came out, he was as straightforward as you can get. He was basically Buck Rogers, but as a raccoon. And it wasn't till the 2000s where they kind of adapted his character and made him angrier and crankier and realizing, hey, I wasn't born this way, and now look at me, I'm this creature they made me into. And it became more of a thing. And now he is definitely an anti-hero. And that's part of why I'm really looking forward to these the Avengers Infinity War movies, because I just love seeing that kind of personality interact with the more straightforward heroes out there. And that's what anti-heroes are for, bouncing off the other heroes.
How does a story like Watchmen fit into the hero, anti-hero, villain convention?
All right. Well, Watchmen was created by writer Alan Moore, who became famous deconstructing superheroes. I say famous within the comic book community initially, and then later on, movies based on his stuff. But all of his early works especially were just taking everything that we thought we loved about heroes and showing how messed up that can be. And Watchmen is a really good example of that. He took characters that on the surface look like, straightforward great heroes, and then all of those characters are anti-heroes. Whether it's because they are ineffectual in their personal life, or because they will kill randomly and smile about it afterwards, or whatever the reason, they were anti-heroes specifically because the whole story was meant to comment on hero culture. Similarly, he made the story V for Vendetta, in which the hero, the masked guy with a name, was an anarchist who wanted to just kind of watch the world burn, and he was the good guy. And then his most straightforward hero story of the 80s was probably Miracle Man, where you have this guy realizing that he's the greatest hero that ever lived, and then realizing that that puts him way above humanity and he doesn't have to think about them anymore. So it's really, really interesting stuff. So that, to me, is why anti-heroes should exist, to really, really get into those deeper corners of our psyche.
So I missed a lot of that, but did you hear
He
it?
was saying, are there any villains that permanently made the change from villain to hero and it worked? Because I was saying it often does not. I would say that Harley Quinn and Deadpool don't really fit into this because they were very briefly, and I mean in the time span of like decades of comics, very briefly villains before they were already becoming anti-heroes. Harley Quinn was a villain for a long time in the cartoons, but in the comic book she was a villain for like 2 issues before they were already making her an anti-hero. And in Deadpool, he was a villain for like a year or 2 before he had his own miniseries. So, but there are some villains that did last, and the ones that come to mind right now are Loki, Magneto, and in his own way, Dr. Doom, who I didn't really cover because he hasn't really had any good movies, unfortunately. But in the case of Loki, he was always said to be the god of lies, and in the comics, over the course of the past 15, 20 years, he has redefined himself. He now considers himself the god of stories. Stories can be a lie or a truth. It can be good or it can be evil. It doesn't matter. But of course, everybody else doesn't trust him. So no matter what he does, it is going to come back and bite him. He was used really, really well in recent Doctor Strange comics, where the whole premise is that everybody has to stop Loki. And, turns out Loki's actually trying to help people, but who's going to believe him? Magneto, his transition has been really, really smooth and has been happening since the 80s. So every once in a while he'd backslide into villainy again, but because his ultimate goal is mutants should be allowed to live their lives, it's just a matter of getting him to be less on the make humans your slaves thing. And he can, he can adapt that. And Dr. Doom, what's great about him is how all these times you see a villain try to take over the world or take over the city or take over the country, Dr. Doom runs his own country. And if you ask the people in his country, he's like the best leader that he ever had. He gives them free health care, free education. He takes care of all of their needs. They have houses and all the technology that he can invent. The only condition is they have to worship him. He's their science pope. So from his point of view, he's trying really hard to be a good guy. And very often, the heroes have begrudgingly allowed him to work with them, provided he agrees not to then force everybody to worship him afterwards. So yes, it can happen. And those are the biggest examples. But it's just, so often I will see it forced, like with Juggernaut. There was a big push in the 90s to make Juggernaut a hero, and they did a little bit in the early 2000s as well, and it never really stuck because he was always just like a bank robber bad guy. It doesn't make sense. And Sandman was such a big change that later writers came in and said, you know what, he was under like an alternate personality. The real him is a bad guy, So it just didn't stick. And that's part of the nature of American comics. In Japanese manga and anime, there's usually like a limited story. They have a specific story they're planning for. American comics, they just go on forever. And it's just hard to make it stick. So there you go. So he's saying, would an anti-hero's villain be a hero or a villain? And I think that is actually a really, really great question. And that kind of digs into what makes an anti-hero what it is. Again, in a lot of the superhero movies you've seen recently, you have seen a hero fight a bad guy who is basically them. And, that was neat the first time you saw it, and less so when it's the 20th movie. And an anti-hero really should not be that. You shouldn't have Venom fighting a bunch of symbiote bad guys. But you should have exactly that story. Either or. Either the anti-hero fighting the good guy who thinks he's right, and often in Loki's case, knows that he's wrong, or the opposite, having a villain that is so bad that Deadpool has to become a good guy, And that's where it's all about challenging the psychological nature of what it means to be a hero. You're either showing the people who you think are right are not always perfect, or showing that as bad as you think you aren't deep down. And either way, that's the point. So yeah, I agree. An anti-hero's villain should not be just a reflection of themselves. It should be either or extreme. It should be somebody who's really, really good, or somebody who is so bad they have to be good.
All right.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Right on time.